Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most dramatic turns in Eastern Europe's recent history. Belarus stands alone, and a new era of independence begins. For years, Belarus has been seen as Russia's closest ally, often referred to as Moscow's little brother, but that narrative is changing fast. The winds of independence are sweeping across Minsk, and what was once considered unthinkable is now unfolding before the world's eyes. Belarus, for the first time in decades, is asserting its sovereignty and distancing itself from the Kremlin's grasp, signaling a monumental shift in the balance of power across Europe. The relationship between Belarus and Russia has always been complex. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Belarus maintained strong political and economic ties with Moscow. President Alexander Lukashenko often positioned himself as the bridge between East and West, though over time, that bridge became increasingly one-sided, leaning heavily toward Russia. The Kremlin provided economic aid, energy subsidies, and political backing, especially during moments of crisis. But with that support came expectations. Expectations of loyalty, alignment, and obedience to Moscow's agenda. For years, Lukashenko complied, but recent developments have pushed Belarus toward a breaking point. It all began with a growing sense of unease inside Belarus itself. After years of internal control, sanctions, and diplomatic isolation, the Belarusian leadership realized that dependence on Russia was becoming a trap. The war in Ukraine changed everything. As the global community rallied around Ukraine and as sanctions hit Moscow hard, Belarus found itself tied to a sinking ship. While Russia demanded unwavering loyalty, Belarus started to see the costs of that loyalty. Economic strain, international backlash, and the risk of being viewed as complicit in Russia's aggression all began to weigh heavily on Minsk. Then came the turning point, a silent but clear shift in tone from Lukashenko's government. Slowly, speeches began to highlight Belarusian sovereignty, independence, and national pride. These were not just words. They were signals to both Moscow and the world that Belarus was preparing to chart its own course. Recent policy moves, diplomatic gestures, and even subtle media messaging have all pointed toward a country trying to reclaim control over its destiny. Belarus, long overshadowed by the Kremlin, is now taking its first steps into a new era of autonomy. This transition is not without risk. The Russian government has relied on Belarus as a buffer state, a loyal neighbor that could be trusted to align with Moscow's strategic interests. Belarus served as a crucial partner during the Ukraine conflict, providing logistical support and allowing Russian troops to operate near its borders. For Belarus to now assert independence is a direct challenge to Vladimir Putin's vision of a united Eurasian sphere under Russian influence. This move could provoke strong reactions from the Kremlin, including political pressure, trade restrictions, or even covert destabilization efforts. Yet despite these potential consequences, Minsk appears determined to move forward. The people of Belarus have long desired genuine independence. Beneath the surface of state control, censorship, and fear, there's a deep-rooted sense of national identity that predates modern politics. The Belarusian language, culture, and traditions have survived decades of Soviet assimilation and Russian influence. Now that identity is re-emerging stronger than ever. Citizens, intellectuals, and even segments of the government are starting to express pride in being Belarusian, not as a subset of the Russian world, but as a distinct and independent nation. This cultural awakening is fueling the political movement towards sovereignty. Internationally, Belarus's pivot is being watched closely. The European Union and the United States have both signaled cautious optimism, seeing this as an opportunity to reduce Russia's influence in Eastern Europe. While sanctions and diplomatic restrictions still exist due to past political crackdowns, Western governments are now considering how to engage with a more independent Belarus. Some analysts believe that if Belarus continues on this path, it could open the door to economic cooperation, energy diversification, and a gradual reintegration into global markets. However, these opportunities depend heavily on how Lukashenko manages internal reforms and foreign policy balancing. Inside the country, the mood is mixed but hopeful. There's uncertainty about what this new direction truly means. Many Belarusians still remember the economic benefits that came from Russian partnership: cheap gas, stable trade, and security guarantees. Breaking free from that system could bring short-term hardship, but others argue that true freedom is worth the cost. They believe that Belarus must endure a difficult transition period to build a sustainable future, one that is not tied to the politics of Moscow. The idea of self-reliance is gaining momentum, especially among younger generations who see independence as a path to modernization and progress. Lukashenko himself faces a delicate balancing act. For decades, his power relied on Moscow's support. Now, as he attempts to steer the country away from Russian dominance, he risks both domestic and external challenges. Yet this could also redefine his legacy. If he manages to establish Belarus as a truly independent nation, free from the shadow of Russia, it would be one of the most remarkable political transformations in post-Soviet history. For now, he is walking a tightrope, maintaining dialogue with Moscow to avoid direct confrontation while gradually strengthening national institutions, the economy, and the armed forces to stand on their own. One of the clearest signs of this shift is Belarus's effort to diversify its economy. Trade relations are slowly expanding beyond Russia, with new talks emerging with China, Turkey, and even European partners. The goal is to reduce dependency on Russian energy and to develop industries that can thrive independently. Infrastructure projects, digital development, and agricultural reforms are being introduced as part of this broader strategy. Belarus wants to show the world that it is capable of surviving and prospering on its own. The road ahead, however, will not be easy. Russia is unlikely to watch passively as one of its closest allies drifts away. Economic pressure, cyber operations, and political manipulation could all be used to remind Minsk of its vulnerabilities. But if Belarus remains resolute, this could become a defining moment not just for itself but for the entire region. The emergence of an independent Belarus would send shockwaves across Eastern Europe and beyond, challenging long-held assumptions about Russia's dominance. This story is still unfolding. Every statement, every diplomatic move, and every alliance matters. The question now is how far Belarus is willing to go in pursuit of its independence, and how much it is ready to risk for that dream. For now, one thing is clear. A new chapter has begun. The people of Belarus are reclaiming their voice, their sovereignty, and their future. This is not just about politics. It's about national identity, dignity, and the universal human desire for self-determination. As we watch events continue to evolve, the message from Minsk grows louder and clearer. Belarus stands alone, not in isolation but in strength. It's stepping into a future written on its own terms, no longer defined by its neighbors but by the will of its people. This marks the beginning of a new era of independence, one that could reshape the destiny of an entire region. And as history unfolds before us, the world is witnessing the rebirth of a nation that has finally decided to stand tall, unshaken, and truly free.